Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. Coming up today, after victory in the North London derby, is Arsenal's leaner squad capable of keeping pace with Manchester City across both the Premier League and the Champions League? Also, David Ornstein will bring us all the details on Mikel Arteta's new contract. All right, joining me, we have the Athletics football correspondent, David Ornstein, as well as newsletter lead writer, Phil Hay, as well. David, let's talk North London derby. Heated, as you'd expect, but a huge win for Arsenal, given the fact that Manchester City have really hit the marks this season so far.
Yeah, it was a massive result for Arsenal. A huge performance, third win in a row at Tottenham. So they've really shifted the balance of power back in their favour after it did seem to be creeping in the other direction in the sort of late Wenger, Emery, early Mikel Arteta reign. And so that's sort of bragging rights and a sense of superiority on their side for the time being. There was the context of losing Martin Odegaard, Declan Rice, Mikel Merino heading into such a crucial fixture. There was Tottenham needing to get a win on the board after a mixed start to the season. There was Manchester City pulling ahead of them already at this early stage of the campaign. And it just felt like there was real magnitude. They didn't even get to wear their favoured red and white kit for the first time in a long time in a North London derby away from home. And so there was a lot going against them, but things started to turn. Obviously, they were boosted by the signing of Raheem Sterling on deadline day. We then broke the news of Mikel Arteta's new contract, which would have given them a boost. And I kept saying to people, it's not being wise after the event. You can see my posts on You can see my posts on Threads where I was saying Arsenal's still going to name a really strong and competitive team without a shadow of a doubt. And that is testament to what Mikel Arteta has built in his reign and what Ange Postecoglou will try to do across his. And it will just give Arsenal so much belief ahead of a massive week with Atalanta to come in the Champions League on Thursday, then a trip to Manchester City on Sunday. And what it encapsulates is the fact that Arsenal are now a force to be reckoned with. Two back-to-back second-place finishes in the Premier League, returning to the Champions League for the first time after a 7-year absence, which Mikel Arteta led them to with that first second-place finish a couple of years ago. And there were so many elements that we can discuss for that match, but it really was a statement of intent. It's only 3 points. It's very early in the season, so we've got to keep some perspective here. And also on the Tottenham side, it feels like a massive blow for them. And they'll be picking over the bones of it. A lot of sort of recriminations in the fan base and things, but it's only 3 points against, and they've got the opportunity to strike back. But I do think it told us a lot about both clubs' statuses right now. And yeah, Arsenal fans will be buzzing.
Yeah, I mean, Phil, David says only 3 points. 3 points in the Premier League. You'll take them in any match, to be fair. But, I mean, from a Spurs perspective, I mean, you look at the stats in that possession, Spurs 63.7%, Arsenal 36.3%. In terms of clear-cut chances, Arsenal 2, Spurs none. Do you think it's a chance missed by Spurs, considering, the lack of personnel from Arsenal's midfield as well, and also where they're looking to get to this season?
Oh, it is. I mean, he was quite tetchy afterwards, Ange Postecoglou, and he'll know that Arsenal were not badly exposed yesterday, but were weakened quite significantly, and he'll know that Spurs have missed a trick. I mean, Arsenal were never going to turn up and be a soft touch because they just aren't a soft touch under Arteta ever. I think even the days of them going to City and getting turned over 4-0 as they did a couple of years ago have gone now. They're too disciplined and too organised for that. And if you looked at the bench, the Arsenal bench was pretty light. Spurs were not far off being full metal jacket. And I think what Postecoglou wanted and what he had to produce was a game where at some stage Arteta was under pressure to change it with kind of limited options behind him. And once Arsenal got through the first 20 minutes, which were a bit dicey for them, and the structure wasn't perfect, they just didn't look like they were going to concede. And I think David's absolutely right what he says about Arteta. More and more you see Arteta moving into this, properly elite bracket of coach. Even though he was without players, key players, and I think Rice and Odegaard, the ones in particular. Mourinho, obviously, we haven't seen yet, but I think Arteta would have seen him as absolutely tailor-made for yesterday's game. So, those are really big absentees. But despite that, his squad is just so interchangeable. Players drop into positions where they need to do a job, and they do a job. That 4-4-2 defensive shape was excellent as it went on yesterday and just got better and better. He never felt like David Raya was going to concede, even though the sort of possession counter for Tottenham was ticking over. And I think what you saw last week was the build-up handled really well by Arteta under a lot of pressure, particularly once Odegaard was lost to injury with Norway. And I think from a Tottenham perspective, they would have been looking for a big week from Postecoglou, a plan that worked, a strategy that took advantage of the little weaknesses that were there for Arteta. And it didn't happen. And, David is right technically to say it's only 3 points, but I think it did demonstrate a pretty big gulf, not only between the squads, but between the performance of the coaches as well.
Yeah, David, it's, Gabriel Magalhaes' face that's going to be across all the headlines today for scoring the goal. But, look deeper into social media. The name Nicolas Jover comes back again, creeping up. Set-piece coach for Arsenal. Since he joined Mikel Arteta's staff in 2021, Arsenal have scored, 42 goals, I think, from set-pieces. That's the most out of any team in Europe's top 5 leagues. I mean, we can't underestimate the importance of that, especially in these kind of games that are so tight and based on fine margins.
It's a massive difference, night and day, and people might try and scoff at it and overlook the importance of set pieces, the marginal gains, those little factors that make such a big difference. But it would be remiss of us to do so because it's tangible. You can see it. Arsenal fans sort of used to always laugh at, agonise, I should say, at how corners always used to get cut out by the first man, an Arsenal corner. And there was actually one yesterday where Gary Neville on the commentary groaned at the sort of missed opportunity to get it into the box after Vicario had just flapped at a ball. And that was a rarity for Arsenal now because they've come on so far since Jover took his position. And prior to him, they had experimented with Andreas Georgesson, who is at Manchester United now. And so they've cottoned on to this new wave. You've got somebody like Austin McPhee at Aston Villa who's doing a fantastic job. And you notice when players respect these individuals because these are guys that are helping them win massive matches and tip the balance of play in their favour. And these are their careers at stake. They often go over and hug them and sort of celebrate with them. Talking of the Brentford school where Jover came from, there's Bernardo Cueva, who Chelsea have snapped up, and he's on their front bench on match days now, very integral to instructions. They kept their first clean sheet away from home at Bournemouth on Saturday, first in a long time. So you do notice these differences, and Ange Postecoglou may feel he was a bit misinterpreted with his initial comments. I don't think he was meaning to say that he doesn't care about set pieces or they're not important, but he kind of suggested this time round that they are one of many important factors. So whether that's a climb down or he's just seeking to clarify now, the facts kind of speak for themselves. And, there's Tottenham fans pointing out that, if it's 1 in 4 games, well, if that's the ratio going forward, then they've got a problem on their hands because teams like Arsenal are conceding none in 4 games. And these things do matter. And look, Mikel Arteta is really methodical from the day he arrived, really. And we reported on it very heavily at the time. He tried to change the culture at the training ground and the club. He brought in... He made some quite bold appointments on the coaching side, some very young coaches around him for a massive club like Arsenal. He had experience in the form of Steve Round, who was there at the time, who has since moved on. And he's got his trusted lieutenant in Albert Stuyvenberg. So a nice blend there. But he's constantly changed it. It may not always have gained headlines, but on the strength and conditioning side and the medical side, that there's all sorts of little tweaks that have taken place. He's had time and patience to get this right. Not just on the coaching side, on the recruitment side, because he's built a squad that has been suited to these situations. He's got some very tall players there now. Gabriel's record is pretty prolific for a central defender. He's got a colossal in William Saliba next to him. He's bringing in guys all the time. Declan Rice with his height, Mikel Merino, of course, Ricardo Calafiori, and Kai Havertz, who I saw a stat that is, winning more aerial balls than any other striker in the Premier League or Europe at the moment. And so it's these sorts of things that they're well thought through over a lot of time, and with backing from sporting director Edu, from the directors at the club, the ownership at the club, like proper authority in the transfer market, in the building of a club. This is Arteta's club. Make no mistake about it. He is in control of this project. And so I think a bit of perspective is needed for Spurs when they look at this. Like, Arsenal are way ahead of them in their journey. And, Ange Postecoglou has shown some positive signs in the first season in particular. It's been a bit of a rocky start this time round. The fans have taken to him really well. They've made some good appointments from sort of executive level. Scott Munn, who came in from the City Football Group. You've got Johan Langer as technical director. He's brought in people on the recruitment side like Rob McKenzie and Frederick Leth to back him up. And if you look at their work, they're already signing some of the best young players around. So you've got, Archie Gray, for example, one of the top midfielders, young and emerging midfielders in England and potentially in the whole of Europe. You've got, what's the Swedish boy's name? Escapes me again, sorry. Oh, yeah. I'll pick up. You've got Lucas Bergvall. You've got Wilson Odobert. You've got this young player from Korea who they signed in the summer. And there was a CEIS list that was published last week about sort of the best 100 young players in world football based on a certain set of criteria. And I believe Tottenham had more players within that list, whether they're at the club now or waiting to come in or on loan elsewhere, than any other club in the world. So they're clearly putting building blocks in place. They've had some coaching changes themselves, of course. They lost a top coach in Chris Davies to Birmingham City, who's now in charge there. And so they've had to replace. And Ange Postecoglou, he built a new coaching staff, which he's done wherever he's been. He did it at Celtic. He then did it at Tottenham. And it's a learning experience. Like Mikel Arteta was a rookie. He'd never managed as a number one before. Ange Postecoglou has, but he'd never managed in the Premier League before. These are all different levels. There's all different sort of politics within clubs, managing up, managing down and around. And there is a lot that Ange Postecoglou will need to learn. And one of them does appear to be this set piece issue right now. But I just don't think it's as, we know the effect, as I've explained, but it's not as binary as you just bring somebody in and it will be magically cured. As Arsenal have shown, you need to have built the right squad. You need to recruit properly. You need to train properly. And there is some work to do for Tottenham on that front.
There's definitely, I think, a marked difference between what Postecoglou was saying about set pieces back in May. And you remember that Tottenham conceded twice from corners against Arsenal in the last North London derby at home for them. A difference between that and the comments after the game yesterday. I think yesterday he was kind of holding his hands up a little bit more and saying, look, we are aware of what's going on. It is a bit of an issue. Whereas if you go back to May, where he was asked specifically about why don't you have a set-piece coach in the way that Arsenal and others do, it was it was that vibe of, well, we don't need one and it's not really a big deal. Just to come back to Gary Neville, he made two really good points yesterday. One was that when the corner was conceded before the goal, the away end behind that net went up, and it was almost as if in that away end, they all were saying to themselves, eventually we're going to get some change out of a Tottenham corner. So if these keep coming, we're going to score, and Gabriel duly did. But Neville had been talking in the first half as well, looking at Vicario and the way he is when they're setting up for corners, and it kind of reflected on the fact that he looks quite stressed and he looks quite uptight, and there isn't a lot of calmness in his body language, and it does seem to be a weak spot for Tottenham, and it does seem to be an area of vulnerability. But I think David makes a really good point about the young players that Tottenham are signing. If they're going to come good, and if that's going to work as a strategy going forward, then they've almost got to stick with Postecoglou, because as with Arteta at Arsenal, and the going was pretty rough there in certain periods, there's no strategy to this, or there's no sense in it if, when it starts going, if it starts going wrong for Tottenham, they just dispense with it all and start again. I do feel quite strongly, really, that the model at Arsenal is very much what Tottenham need to be replicating, much as they might not like to hear that.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of those points. So firstly, let's not disguise, Spurs want to be competing for honours. Ange Postecoglou said post-match very directly that he always wins in his second season. So he's put this sort of onus on himself there to deliver. And that is the priority. First team, they want to qualify for the Champions League and try and collect some silverware. But Phil's right. They have very clearly taken a different path on recruitment to what they and a number of other clubs have done in the past. Actually, Arsenal now seem to be on a delivery phase of recruitment in terms of Calafiori, Marino, Raheem Sterling. They did it with Jorginho and Trossard, where they're kind of signing players to win now. Even you could say Havertz, Raya, etc. Whereas Tottenham, we've seen how careful they've had to be in the market and prudent. Not so much on FFP and PSR, but cash flow. So they've got to, they can't go spending hundreds of millions of pounds in the way that some others have, and also on salaries they don't pay as high as some of the other top clubs in the Premier League in the world, and so they very clearly have a defined plan here that they're going for the best young players to try and set up a competitive team for the future that they will hope leads them to success. That does, as Phil says, require patience. Arteta was a bit by default. He sort of turned to Saka and Smith Rowe famously to dig him out of a hole, really. There were injuries. They were in a dark period. The club was steadfastly behind him. So this noise and understandable reaction from a lot of the public and Spurs fans post North London derby defeat, I suspect will not be replicated inside the club and at the hierarchy. If they are fully behind Ange Postecoglou in the way that Arsenal were when Mikel Arteta was facing external pressure, then you'd like to think that in time things will improve. And whether it's the way Arsenal have or better or worse, we'll have to wait and see. I just wanted to touch on one final thing around the set-piece coaches. Maurizio Pochettino at Chelsea seemed very resistant to the concept last season in a not too dissimilar sort of tone to what Ange Postecoglou has expressed. And Chelsea were adamant. They were looking at the stats and the bare facts. It was evidence that was there for all to see. They were conceding goals. They weren't scoring them. And so they bought in Bernardo Cueva from Brentford. And he's actually going to be at the heart of a sort of set-piece department that they're going to build out with other specialists and experts coming in. And some coaches might not like that level of fragmentation and delegation because depending on how traditional they are, these managers, many of them like to have things under their control. You've seen with Eddie Howe at Newcastle, he's a little bit traditional in that sense, and he's fantastic at what he does. But now there's sort of suggestions of a bit of tension within the club because they've got a new sporting director and there are appointments being made, and does that fall out of their control? But Chelsea, have gone down this route. That seemed to be one of the points of contention between them and Maurizio Pochettino. But if it improves the club and the results, the play of what we're seeing in front of our eyes, then you've got to go down that route. This is what clubs are doing now. They are turning over every stone. They're looking for the most fractional of advantages, not just sort of trying to keep up with their rivals, but trying to better them. And like, if you can do it in a harmonious way as well, like Arsenal have done, then that's a really good example. Leading the way is like a Manchester City who've been doing this sort of thing for a number of years now. But a lot needs to be done at Spurs, but equally they're not on the worst path when you look at, where they were under the sort of Mourinho, Conte, Nuno Espirito Santo period, where it seemed pretty rancorous. It does seem a more settled operation now, but it will need time and patience, which is a commodity that's in ever shorter supply within football and life as a whole.
Okay, well, let's move on to something you've been across as well, David. Mikel Arteta's contract, signed a new contract at Arsenal. Fair to say he started on this journey, and Arsenal were a whole different kind of team. Where they are right now is probably testament to what he wants to do with the club. Just run us through the details of the new contract for Mikel Arteta very quickly.
Yeah, so Mikel Arteta was into the final 12 months of his previous deal that was signed, I believe, in the summer of 2022. That was a reward for his work after arriving in December of 2019. He took over from Unai Emery. He won Arsenal the FA Cup behind closed doors during the COVID period. He was promoted from head coach to manager. More recently, led Arsenal to a second-place finish back into the Champions League after a 7-year absence. A second-place finish again, providing genuine competition for Manchester City. And they're delighted with the journey that he has taken them on. I don't think there was any nervousness or uncertainty around his future. I think he wanted to stay, and Arsenal expected him to do so and enthusiastically wanted him to do so. But the facts were that in the summer of 2025, his contract was about to expire, like Pep Guardiola's is. And there have been reports linking him to Barcelona, certainly that Barcelona have made admiring glances in his direction in recent times. There have even been suggestions that Manchester City might have him at the top of their list for if and when Pep Guardiola leaves. Let's see on that front. I've got no information. But it was a priority. Mikel Arteta had said we'll deal with it once the transfer window closed. They did indeed. We broke the news that he has extended until the summer of 2027, which is a 3-year deal. No doubt he'll have improved terms. Otherwise, that wouldn't be recognition for the work he's done. And that comes with these new contracts. And so some people have said to me, why didn't it go on for longer? It's not it's a bit of a short term. They'll have to be renegotiating within a couple of years. But that's the way they both wanted it. It seems a very harmonious camp. It's reward for him, but they'll be delighted too. Stability, security on both sides. And so the delight of Arsenal fans, it was a boost ahead of the North London derby after a couple of sort of tough weeks over the international break and post-Brighton. He's at Arsenal to stay. He seems enthusiastic about it. The rival fans and clubs might not be so happy because Arsenal, under his tenure, have become a force to be reckoned with, and I suspect that's going to continue. And crucially, last point, he's been at the heart of this rejuvenation of the Arsenal fan base. It's a completely different atmosphere at Arsenal now. It's home matches, away matches, the noise, the support, the happiness, the sort of positivity that was so lacking for much of the Kroenkes' ownership over the Super League situation, over the redundancies during COVID, the Emery period, the late Wenger years. Mikel Arteta has done an incredible job, and he's at the heart of Arsenal's project for a long time to come.
I think you probably said quite a lot about the cohesion at Arsenal and the general mood there, that it didn't seem to be a concern for anybody that his contract was running down. It didn't seem to be causing tension behind the scenes. And no. I don't think I've seen him, certainly not by you, Orny, but I've not seen him seriously linked with any other job. I was going to ask you about, the City position on the basis that it might be that Guardiola does go at the end of this season. And I don't know whether you ever got feeling for that or not. But do you think, on the basis of this new contract that he's signed, this rules him out of the City job if the City job comes up next summer? Because I honestly struggle to see too many coaches out there that City would necessarily want more. Without suggesting him and Pep are identical, he's shown that he can handle that sort of job.
Well, firstly, we need to see what happens with City's fight against the Premier League, because if it goes against them in a spectacular way, you presume the operation could, at the very best, be set back. At the worst, sort of implode and fall apart. We just don't know on that front. City obviously deny all the charges and are extremely confident that they're going to clear their name and continue business as usual. All conversations you have with them and conversations that player representatives have with them suggest that they have the courage of their convictions that they're going to be fine. And so, of course, that will be at the forefront of their mind. The sort of Catalan hierarchy arrived together, essentially, sort of Ferran Soriano, Chiqui Begiristain, Pep Guardiola, and there's some others in there as well. There's been a sort of slight break-up in Omar Barada leaving for Manchester City, but he didn't kind of come with them in the same way that the others were there. And not for the first time, we're into the last 12 months of Guardiola's contract. I remember breaking the news during the World Cup in Qatar in 2022 when he was about to have 6 months to go that he had agreed a new deal. It wouldn't surprise you if the same would happen. And I think some inside City are optimistic because of what's happened in the past and the hunger that he's showing. In public, but in private conversations, he seems completely engaged, Pep Guardiola. He has actually suggested that he may continue. He isn't showing the signs of a man that's on his way out. There have been suggestions that Chiqui Begiristain may leave, and if that's the case, would Pep Guardiola go with him? We just don't know, and maybe he doesn't know just yet. But City will want some clarity on the direction of travel. Mikel Arteta will be high in their thoughts because they've had him there before. They know the quality of his work. There will still be a lot of relationships between City and Arteta. But there's too many unknowns in all of this. They also like Michel at Girona, for example. He's one who's been heavily... There'll be all manner of coaches coming to the fore. Look how highly Pep Guardiola's talked about Roberto De Zerbi in the past. Look how highly he's talked about Thomas Frank last weekend. Mikel Arteta has moved from Manchester to London with his family. He seems very settled there. It appears that he's there for the long-term future. Of course, going back to Manchester wouldn't be the hardest thing in the world, but I just don't have any credible suggestions other than I'm sure he's on their list, like all top coaches are. But then he's on Barcelona's list, and he came through the Barcelona Academy, and his family links obviously to Spain, having been born in San Sebastian or come from San Sebastian. So I think the City links are understandable, but I don't think at the moment they have any credence, and certainly not to my knowledge.
Yeah, Phil, I'm just thinking, the good times are here and what David talks about, reuniting the fan base with the club and all that kind of stuff, and great transfers and good cohesion with, Edu and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, Arsenal fans want to see trophies, right? Mm-hmm. Coming second again, the third season running, it's going to be a tricky one to take considering all the investment that's been made with Mikel Arteta at the helm.
Yeah, definitely. I think beyond having to win something, I think he needs to win something big, doesn't he? And I think we're talking the Premier League, really, and beyond that, the Champions League. I do sympathise with Arteta in the way that I did with Jurgen Klopp in various seasons, that it's kind of his misfortune to have built such a good, competent, organised Arsenal team at a point where Manchester City just are the machine that they are. I was watching City at the weekend, and Haaland, the width of a post away from a third hat-trick in a row. Somebody with the stats this morning, 9 goals from 20 shots, Haaland this season. That's what you're up against, and that's what City do season after season. So I don't know whether there's much criticism to be aimed at Arteta for the fact he hasn't won anything major at the moment. But he is definitely in that ballpark where that's what he's going to be judged on now. And I think it's very different for Postecoglou. I followed the rhetoric yesterday about, he always wins something in his second season. But I think it's a bit of an irrelevance because this is his first job in a really elite league. He's gone to a club who are not in the habit of winning trophies. And I don't think Tottenham have to win something this season for it to be a good season, or for Postecoglou to keep ticking along nicely. I just think they need to be competitive. And they definitely need to be in the running for the top four, because if you take out the three who are likely to finish top three, City, Arsenal and Liverpool, I don't see an outstanding candidate for fourth place. And Spurs should definitely be in the mix. And I know, again, similar to the set-piece thing, listening to Postecoglou say last season, I'm not interested in fourth place. And I think, to be fair to him, what he was meaning was fourth place isn't necessarily a demonstration that we're playing the way that we want us to play and we're performing as I want us to perform. But it does rather ignore the reality of the fact that, that is a major consideration for clubs like Tottenham, and they need to be in the Champions League. So I think that is a fair benchmark for them. For Arteta and Arsenal, it'll be aiming for the Premier League again. And you have to say, after that win yesterday, it feels like we're set up for the trilogy after the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, right. David, let's move to Arsenal's squad depth at this moment in time. We've talked about the injuries, but I mean, including the Tottenham match, that's 3 away matches back-to-back for Arsenal with a depleted squad. You look at players like Emil Smith-Rowe leaving, you look at Fabio Vieira that could potentially sit in that Odegaard position. Is it right that they've let them go? Because this is the time where you need that squad depth.
Well, we're in a really tricky period now where you've got to balance your profitability and sustainability, so tough decisions need to be made, especially when you've got homegrown talent like Emil Smith-Rowe. Reece Nelson went on loan, but that wouldn't surprise you if it was a sale at some point. Aaron Ramsdale, okay, that wasn't a homegrown player, but in a ideal scenario, Arsenal would keep a second choice goalkeeper of Aaron Ramsdale's standard, but they had an opportunity to make a profit on him. Some cutting of cloths has to take place at Arsenal and elsewhere. It's not ideal when you're trying to compete for the Premier League, the Champions League, the FA Cup, the League Cup. And these are very embryonic stages of the season. I was lauding Liverpool before the international break, although I did say it could all change after the international break, and indeed they had a disappointing result. And so let's see, because really big days ahead for Arsenal, and things could go in the other direction. One of the foundations of their season last time round, the pillars, the cornerstone, was keeping so many players fit. They must have had one of, if not the best injury record in the Premier League. They did sensationally well, especially when you looked at the likes of Manchester United and Newcastle United, absolutely ravaged by injuries. And I don't know how many times that will happen. Tribute to the Arsenal medical team, but it's not easy. And so when you look around that squad, you've got to make tough decisions. Like Fabio Vieira wasn't getting game time at Arsenal, and so maybe a bit of Arsenal wanting to get games under his belt, Vieira wanting to get games under his belt. Smith-Rowe was naturally going to go. He has to get out and play now, and that wasn't happening at Arsenal. But they won't have not thought about this. So, there's opportunities for other goalkeepers in the absence of Ramsdale. They've got Karl Hein there. They've got the player they signed from Ajax, Tommy Setford, coming through gradually. They would have liked to have signed a more senior goalkeeper, but it didn't work out that way. Obviously, they got Neto in, so that sort of covers. I think it was Juan Garcia that they wanted as first choice. And then you look around other positions in the team. You've got Timber coming back, like a new signing. That terrible phrase, but it's true. And he was arguably Arsenal's best player at Tottenham yesterday, although he rode his luck a little bit, some may say, on that challenge that earned him a yellow card. So then you look up into that midfield department you talk about. They've got a fit Partey, which didn't happen for much of the last couple of years. Jorginho was given a new contract and is playing fantastically well, getting more intelligent and game-wise as he gets older. He doesn't rely on his pace and has a pretty good fitness record. Then go into that position that you're talking about. Well, Ethan Nwaneri is coming through. Arteta, perhaps legitimately, has faced some criticism for not using enough young players last season. And he's brought Nwaneri on in the North London derby, and he played pretty well when he did. I think Arsenal fans will want to see him getting more than 10-minute cameos, give him a shot at this and see what he can do. They've got some versatile options across that front line because, we've seen how Trossard can play in different positions. Okay, Havertz seems to have established himself as the number 9, but he was bought actually as a left-sided number 8, and Gabriel Jesus could play up top. They've got Saka, they've got Martinelli. when you think about Raheem Sterling coming in on loan. They've got another player that can play across those positions. So, like, Arsenal aren't going to shoot themselves in the foot. They would like to think they do have solutions in different ways. Like, I remember people talking about, could Timber play as a holding midfielder? Could Ben White, if needed? Does Zinchenko come back? Well, for his country, he plays in a sort of central midfield position, even a number 8, verging on number 10. So, look, it's very difficult to replicate Manchester City's squad depth, but they've had injuries of their own. Like, Oscar Bob was meant to be a key part of their plans for this season, and he suffered a big setback. They decided not to sign back up to Erling Haaland, despite exploring it after the sale of Julian Alvarez. So it's, Erling Haaland had a really tricky season last time round with injury. If something happens to him again, what do they do? So I think when you look at all the other clubs and the way that they've had to make tough decisions for PSR, to balance the books, to get game time for their players, Arsenal have not come out of it badly. The one thing I would say, going back to my point on it being embryonic and early in the season, is we can't judge this yet. Arsenal, it's unlikely they will get away with winning match after match without the likes of Odegaard, of Rice, but he'll be back from suspension, of Marino. Really cruel luck. They'll need Calafiori to come in and be a regular presence as well. But I do think they've got enough. And they will be sweating on the Odegaard situation. It's not like they showed boundless creativity at Tottenham. And Odegaard, it appears when you look at the image of that injury that it was significant. Interesting that Arteta didn't rule him out of the game completely, and then post-match,
I was wondering if you had any insight for us on that, David. Nothing at all.
He was never going to make it. It was what Arteta said, and I it looks like a significant injury, but look, we don't know. I don't think the last I heard, they didn't have full clarity from the scans still because of the extent of the swelling. But the extent of the swelling concerns you if you're an Arsenal fan, because maybe it could be quite tough. But there's international breaks coming up as well, so look, they'll be praying that their creator-in-chief, their captain, is okay, but they will also have to cope without him if it is going to be a prolonged absence. And I think, going back to Phil's point at the beginning of this pod about the sort of time they've spent together and that anybody seems to be able to come in and interchange and know their roles, that is tribute to Arteta and his coaching staff, that they finally got to this point where people can come in and deputise and be comfortable doing so and know what's expected of them. And it could all be blown apart next Sunday, but they look on a pretty good thing, whatever is thrown at them this season. And crucially, they've got a brilliant mentality that is seeing them dig deep and go to the well when necessary and show resilience and respond well to adversity. Now, just want to pick up on a tiny point that obviously Declan Rice wasn't a great, whatever you think about that sending off, it wasn't a great moment for Arsenal season to lose such a key player at such an important time. And then William Saliba was shown a yellow card for delaying the restart again. They're going to have to learn from things like that. But what I noticed was that there would have been a fear among the Arsenal fans that Saliba was going to suffer the same fate. Would he get sent off after an early booking in the North London derby away from home with that atmosphere and intensity? Yet he kept his composure and they finished with 11 men. There have been many times in the past where Arsenal have had 1 or 2 players sent off in games like that. And they're reaching a point now of maturity and very impressive professionalism.
Yeah, Phil, do you think from where you're sitting, Arsenal have enough street smart now to play in this league that, let's face it, if you are going to win the league or go toe-to-toe with Manchester City, it's almost based on perfection at the level City are setting at this moment in time?
That was the point I was making in my last answer. You'd ideally want to be this good as Arsenal in an era where you don't have Guardiola and City up the road, and it does almost require perfection. And I think that's why there was a lot of chat. You certainly saw it on the Sky coverage yesterday, and we wrote about it in the lead up to the game, about the significance of a gap opening up between City and Arsenal, even at this early stage. And I think if Arsenal were going to City 5 points behind this weekend, they'd be feeling a degree of heat. As it is, they're right in the mix, and I think the big thing for Arteta as well is that yesterday's game, even if he'd have liked Arsenal to have played better going forward, it was great practice for what's coming at City, because City will dominate the ball. The patterns of play will be very similar. I think they'll have to deliver the same sort of performance to take anything from that game or to win it. But they do. I think yesterday proved that they do have the squad that they need because of that ability to interchange players without it significantly altering their shape. And I just feel with Arteta that his decision making generally on all sorts of different fronts is so good. I mean, we talked about the players who left, that were allowed to leave. But it wasn't a case of anybody who wants to go and isn't getting minutes, it can just get out the door. They refused, I think David reported on this, the Saudi interest that they've been in Trossard. Mm-hmm. And because they said no to that, they had him yesterday when they really needed him. And you could have looked at the midfield options and said, there's enough depth here, really, to say that Trossard can leave. But actually, that was really savvy and it was really sensible. And I think likewise, you look at the signings that Arteta's made. Raya in goal, another example. I thought he was one of Arsenal's best players yesterday. The bits and pieces that he had to do, it got a lot of criticism, that decision. Ramsdale getting forced to the sidelines, but I find it quite hard to argue with. I think it has made Arsenal better, and I think he's a keeper who suits them better marginally than a very good Ramsdale did. So a good weekend for Arteta, and I think 4 games in, City first, Arsenal second. It's all set up, isn't it, for what we were expecting?
Well, it's Atalanta next in the Champions League and then Manchester City on Sunday. So let's see if Arsenal fans can keep that optimism up. These are 2 very tough away tests. David, Phil, thank you so much for your time. And don't forget, we'll be back tomorrow. And don't forget to rate and review the podcast. Thank you for listening. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.